Sure.
All the little notes.
Presenter mode. Give me 1 second. I know. Give me 1 second.
Right.
No, thank you. I'm the one who couldn't figure it out. I appreciate you.
Oh my God. Thank God it's just us.
I know.
There's always so many issues.
So many issues. All right, we've done it. We're here. Woo! Okay, so we're talking about pivoting and rebranding. Next slide. Okay, so everybody knows me, but I'm Kristy of Kristy Black Creative. As Aaron said, I help entrepreneurs with bright eyes and big whys cultivate more joy and ease in their business. Next slide.
Oh, no.
And I do that through kind of two buckets of services. One is branding. So this looks like brand audits, brand strategy, and brand design. And then also through education and coaching. I have my evergreen course, Wildly Aligned, which helps you nail your niche and master your messaging. I also do workshops like this. I'm getting into goal coaching, and then I have a 21-day habit challenge that's coming up as well. So next slide. Okay, so what we are covering today. Oh man, I gotta make mine bigger so I can see. Today we're gonna be talking about when to pivot or rebrand, how to retain your golden thread and what that is and why it's important. And then we're gonna talk about how to make the most of it and actually implement a pivot. We'll talk a little bit about the difference between pivoting and rebranding as well, because they don't necessarily both have to happen at the same time. Next slide. Okay, and pivoting is just one reason that you might be in need of a brand refresh. So most of this presentation is going to be on pivoting, but I'm going to talk about branding at the top because we'll go through some exercises and you'll get to see whether or not it's something that is going to be important for you if you're considering a pivot. So we're going to talk about branding first. Next slide. All right, so when to rebrand. These are going to be some of the business indicators. So I always like to think about, especially for entrepreneurs and smaller companies, I usually classify that as anything as fewer than 10 people. There are business indicators, and then there are also personal individual indicators as well. So from a business perspective, when you might need to rebrand, like I said, pivoting is one reason. If your offers have expanded or changed over time and are no longer represented in your brand. This happens a lot when people start in one area. They think, for me, for example, I used to be Kristy Black Design, and then I started getting into other areas like art direction and things like that. So it became Kristy Black Creative. So sometimes you have to rebrand because you've outgrown old services. If growth or profits have plateaued or are declining, this might be a sign that something is no longer working. And this is something that it's not just like a month, right? You need several months of data to support this because there are obviously seasons where things are busier and things are slower. If there's too much competition in your area now, maybe you started out in a niche that wasn't as popular and over time people have adapted to that, it might be time to rebrand. If your audience has outgrown your existing offers. So this happens a lot. I see this with designers and coaches where you start off serving like an introductory, like a basic business, right? They're in their first year. And then you learn over time, oh my gosh, I actually like helping them get to that next step, right? I've helped them get to the middle point and now I'm helping them get to an even higher level. That can be a sign that now you need to rebrand because your language isn't going to be the same. Also, if there is like a really clear runaway success in one area of your business or like a clear winning offer that feels aligned to you, it might be time to rebrand. All right, next slide. Okay, so these are the internal indicators. These are the things that it might feel like. So if your vision for your brand or business has changed, I think sometimes we start a business with one vision in mind, and then over time, it slowly changes. And then one day you sort of wake up, quite what I had hoped anymore. That can be a sign that it might be time to rebrand. If things are feeling really unaligned with your values, especially if it's just you and your business, having it be aligned with your values is incredibly important. If your perception of your industry has shifted, so this can look like things like industry standards, practices, norms. If your perception of how people are running businesses is now different and you want to sort of buck the trend or do things differently, this might be a time to rebrand. Also, if the perception of your target market's industry has changed. So let's say you are serving, I don't know, you're serving nutritionists and like you love serving nutritionists, but all of a sudden you're seeing an industry trend where like they're making fun of fat people and you're like, whoa, like this isn't like the vibe anymore. Maybe I want to help a different niche within this area. That might be a time for you to sort of reconsider who you're serving, and thus you would probably have to rebrand in some facet. All right, next slide. And you might not need a complete rebrand, but rather a refresh. So unless you're like Pepsi or a huge conglomerate, you can do things in phases. It doesn't have to be this big, sexy reveal. Are changing, that is definitely an option. So branding happens in a lot of different areas. It encompasses photography, type, color, tone, messaging, logos, all of these things. And so there's a lot of push and pull that comes into branding. So if you are now offering new things or you are removing services, serving a new audience, you can push and pull each of those elements to meet the new needs. And also, this doesn't have to happen all in days. So you can do a lot of that strategy stuff on the back end, and no one's going to know that you are changing how you're doing your messaging or all of that. They might notice a slight shift, but most people aren't that perceptive. So it doesn't have to be something that feels so overwhelming if that's not what it necessitates. Next slide. Next slide. So pivoting is when you make a fundamental change to your business. This is something that is really kind of like cracking open what you're doing, and now you're going in a different direction. Next slide. So just as with branding, pivoting doesn't necessarily mean you have to do a complete 180. Again, you hear about the 180s because it's more interesting, right? You hear about a photographer who used to only do things in cities, and now she's doing elopements somewhere else. Like, it doesn't have to be so dramatic. You can do slight things. And that was a terrible example. It could be more dramatic. But again, it doesn't have to happen all at once. It can happen at varying degrees as well. So instead of being 180, maybe you're just slowly course correcting over time. You're just sort of nudging the needle over and over until you end up facing a different direction. It can also be something that takes place primarily behind the scenes. Anyone who has done any kind of mindset work or personal development knows that sometimes the biggest changes are ones that aren't visible. And so that pivot might not look very dramatic to everyone else, but to you it feels fundamentally different. The way you are showing up is different. The way you're communicating is different. And then the other thing is it can be additive. We always think about, I think oftentimes people talk about pivots in terms of, oh, I'm not doing that anymore. Thing over here. It can be a yes and. You can keep offering what you have and add new services. It doesn't necessarily have to be an eliminating process. And now if you do that, I'm going to tell you how to keep that golden thread so you don't confuse the hell out of your customers. So now the next slide. Next slide. Okay, so why and when pivot. So these are going to sound really similar to the branding ones, but there's some subtle differences here. So your audience has outgrown your existing offers. If they're starting to feel like this isn't what I signed up for, if they're noticing your values have changed, so you might be offering the same service, but the way that you deliver them is different, and you're starting to feel this sort of disconnect, that can be a sign that it's time to pivot. Again, if there's a runaway success, that's a time to pivot. If there's too much competition, if your growth or profits have plateaued or declined, and if there's a fundamental shift that requires action immediately, I think the pandemic is a great example of this, where there were things that were imposed on them that were outside control, and so they had to adapt to new situations. And pivoting is often just another way of saying adapting to whatever new framework is either being imposed on you or that you are imposed on your business. And how you want to run it. Next slide. So continuing on this, these are the internal indicators. So if you've been doing a lot of mindset, you are growing a lot and you are changing your values, this could be a sign that it's time to pivot. If the industry is changing and it's making you feel really unaligned, this can be a sign. This often shows up in where you might be taking on a project that you've done a lot before. And so you're like, okay, yeah, I'd love to help. find yourself procrastinating and avoiding it, and you're just starting to feel kind of like, I don't want to do this anymore. Those are usually the first inklings that a pivot might need to happen. They're the subtle whispers that something is coming. If your vision has changed and you're starting to feel tension, that's sort of a similar thing where things, I always describe it as like an itchy sweater. It's not overbearing. You can live with it, but you're starting to feel like just a little uncomfortable. If you aren't feeling joy or excitement around the work that you used to and you're getting really excited about something new, that might be a sign. Or if everything is just feeling sort of out of alignment, like you've been changing things little by little, and then all of a sudden around at everything you've been working on, you're like, this isn't it. This might not be it. That might be a time to pivot. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, so here are some questions to determine if it's really time to pivot, because I think pivoting is a hot topic, and so people are excited about, which is good. I would rather have people more inclined to pivot and adapt than to stand strong in something that isn't working. But I need you to ask yourself, if you're considering a pivot, have you been doing things in their current configuration? So have you been running your business with the same offers, the same processes, the same audience, long enough to have metrics that actually show a pivot is the right move? This is my question for basically calling bullshit. If you are someone who is chasing shiny object syndrome, like this needs to be something that has been percolating for a little bit. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be backed by data, but this is just knowing that you've had enough time to make sure that it's what you really, really want. The other question I really like to ask is, if I continue business as is, what will my next year look like and how would that feel? And that's the one that sometimes gets people thinking when you're like, oh, if I change nothing and it's just like this, I don't think I would be happy. So if you go through that question, I was going to do some time for journaling, but we're going to plow on through. But if you journal about this and you're starting to think, ooh, this isn't what I want, that might be a sign that it's time to pivot. And if you start to imagine what your business and life would look like if you do make the pivot and it feels really aligned, it's probably time to take the step and it's not just chasing something shiny. Okay, and then we're going to go to the next slide, and then we're going to skip that one. We're going to go to the next one. Okay, so Aaron asked to talk about pivoting pitfalls, and so these are the ones that I see most often. I've definitely seen more people pivoting in the last couple of years than I had previously. And so what this can look like is jumping ship versus course correcting. So this can look like someone who is like really trigger happy, and they're just like, I'm ready to like burn it down and start over. And there is usually something to be retained. If you have been running a business in any capacity, there are skills that you've learned. There are clients that were probably worth your time, lessons that you learned that can be brought along with you. And so if you are ready to just burn it all to the ground, instead of accepting that this is like the next phase of a journey, that can cause a lot of problems, because you're basically saying what you've learned up until now isn't going to serve you. And that will make your life harder. It's basically like starting from square one versus building on what you've already done. Pivoting too quickly without a plan in place to announce it is also a huge pitfall. This happens a lot because when you're thinking about doing a pivot, you've been thinking about it for a while, right? If you went through those questions and you're like, I've been percolating on this and it's like what I want to do, you've been thinking about it for a long time. The external world is just hearing about it. So if you announce it with no plan, it's going to feel really aligned for you. But the people listening to your message might be confused if you don't go about it strategically. If you aren't doing the work to find that golden thread, which I'm going to show you how to do in a second here, that can cause a lot of problems. Also, placing all of your self-belief or belief in your business on this one aspect. So let's get into this a little bit more. So let's go to the next slide. So what is driving you to consider a pivot, and why is it important to you? These are the things that you really need to have top of mind in order to make sure that your mindset is in the right place before you consider something like a pivot. Next slide. So if you start thinking about these things, we have to make sure the mindset is correct and that you're coming about it in the right way. So everyone knows having a good mindset is super critical to success. So basing your self-belief around a goal or around a pivot or anything, really any single facet of an identity or an action you want to take, if your goals, if you find yourself thinking, once I do X, I will be Y, that is a huge red flag. So if you're like, once I pivot, I will be happy or I will be successful. When we dig into that deeper, what you're actually saying is, I am not successful right now. And then you're like, oh, why aren't I successful right now? Oh, because I'm not doing things that I should be doing. Why is that? Oh, because I'm a garbage person, because I'm not capable, because blah, 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 blah. And we dig. And then we're like, wait, how did we get here? So you can have a goal of pivoting. You just need to make sure that you're not hinging the success of everything around this pivot, because just like branding, we can do all of the right things. We can set up everything in place. We can have the right strategy. We can have all of our ducks in a row. But ultimately, our reputation is out of our control. And ultimately, there are a lot of factors in business that are out of our control. We do our very best to keep things in line, but we're humans and we are chaotic. So making sure that you build in space for growth and unexpected things is what allows your pivot to be successful. And when you do hit challenges, for you to keep going versus having this sort of fixed mindset where you're like, now I'm not successful because the pivot didn't go exactly how I wanted. It definitely cracks open some of that perfectionist tendency and makes the pivot a lot more feasible. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so something that's really important in this mindset realm is evidence building. So whenever we do something new in our life, our brain is doing the best to protect us from the unknown. This is why anxiety exists. They're unskilled protectors. So whether you have anxiety or trauma responses or anything that has you shifting into worst case scenarios, what ifs, what if you can't do this? Those are your brain trying to protect you because it feels like something unknown is happening. But it's an unskilled protector. So I like to think of this as if there's water coming down a mountain, there's going to be a groove where water usually comes down the mountain. So if you are stuck in this habit of focusing on the what ifs and the worst case scenarios, it's going to default into that area where the water comes down. But if you need to write a new neural pathway, you're going to have to divert that water to a new path. And it's not always easy, but it can be done. So how this is done when you're trying to focus on something new, like pivoting in your business, is build a case for your brain for why you're capable as fuck to rebrand, to pivot, to do whatever the thing is that you're trying to do. And so what you can do here in order to build that evidence is come up with a list of all of the transferable skills that you have. So these are things like that you were maybe doing old positions, if you had a full-time job previously, or in your business as it currently stands, that's still going to serve you in this new variation. So these could be things like people skills, communication skills. Oh, I'm really great at setting up a sales page. That's going to help me sell my next offer. Like all of these things are transferable. So those are things that you take note of. Also, keeping track of feedback from past clients is really affirming of your talent. I know Erin and I have talked about having a file for these sorts of things. That also shows your brain that, like, yes, I have skills and inherent value and worth. You can also keep track of examples of when you took a leap of faith and it worked out. So really all of this is helping your brain sort of learn that there is stuff to support you. You aren't going into this blind. There are resources and talents that you already inherently have that you can take with you into this new phase of your business. All right, next slide. All right, now we're going to talk about finding your golden thread. Next slide. Ooh, okay, so what is your golden thread? This is your unique magic that you have. This is what keeps your customers from getting whiplash anytime you roll out a new offer, pivot. This is what keeps everything grounded. It ties everything together regardless of what else is going on, and it's going to be what makes your community see your pivot as the next natural progression. They're going to see it and go, oh, that makes sense. Let you would offer that. I totally understand. So let's talk about how we're going to figure that out. Let's go to the next slide. So this one I am going to have us go through this activity. So if you have a notebook, you can also do this on your computer. We're going to do, if you are going to, otherwise you can just kind of hang out. We're going to have a Venn diagram here where we are looking at old business or old offer and then comparing it to the new business or new offer. And so this is how we find our silver thread. So here we're just trying to find out what these two things have in common. So things to consider here are the audience that's served, Psychographics are going to be more useful than demographics here. So just thinking about how they make purchasing decisions, what motivates them to make decisions, things like that. Also consider things like values, beliefs, goals, interests, all of those things that you might have that are in common. And then it can also be helpful to think about past clients you've had that are a good fit for both of those offers. And then start listing things that that person has that kind of ties it all together. Also, outside of the audience, you can think about structure of your offers, how your offers are delivered, the price point, the specific transformations that you're delivering on. So some of those, that's usually one that is consistent. You're giving them a similar transformation. And then the last thing I want to note here is that if there is a lot of overlap here, you probably don't need to rebrand or do a brand refresh because there's going to be a lot in common. So I'm just going to give you like 2 hot minutes to do this.
Kristy, can you explain psychographics?
Yeah, so these are more so, I think a lot of times about dream clients, we think about like the demographics, but really the more important part of who you're serving is like what they believe, how they show up in the world, what things make them irritated, how they make decisions. It's really more about humanizing the ideal client so you're getting kind of in their headspace. I also like to describe this as usually this is kind of a past version of yourself. Where maybe you were struggling with a certain area, and so you can kind of use that as like your frame of reference.
Okay, so like for example, this is not the like biz offer or whatever I'm doing, but just to like get my brain wrapped around it. So like a demographic would be like I work with a Botox client or a Botox studio, and so their demographic is like West Soho, like mostly women. So that would be like a demographic. And then the psychographic would be like people that are interested in like convenience and accessibility.
Take Uber Black.
They take Uber Black.
Yes,
actually.
exactly.
Okay, cool. So things like the values, goals, belief, interests, that's the psychographic part. Yeah.
Anything you can do to make it go from, I don't know how to sum this person up into their age and stuff, and like really just making it like a single entity.
Perfect. I have to Google this word every single time I use it. So like, and I learned this in grad school too, but it's like one of those things I'm always like, oh crap, what does it mean? Psychographics. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the psychology of the person and the way they show up in the world. Okay. Yeah, I just keep it simple. There's probably a better, more scientific definition, but that's how my brain has distilled it over the years. All right, so I know y'all are still working, but we're going to keep going. So there'll be a little bit more time to work so you can kind of come back to this. So let's jump to the next slide where we add this third piece of our complicated Venn diagram. So we have the silver thread. This is what's common between the old and the new. And so now the thing that we are going to layer on top of that are your values, your why, what you are bringing to this. So the overlap where you're seeing the old offer in your values, anything that's in that area are values or driving energies that you are no longer in alignment and you don't want to bring them with you. This is an important section to fill out because when you get stressed out and when things are challenging as you go through a pivot, you might default to those things. So being really cognizant of those values that aren't serving you anymore or the ways we're showing up that don't serve you anymore, that is important to keep top of mind. The section where your values are overlapping with your new business or new offer, that's the new driving force of your business. So some aspects of your why will likely be retained, but maybe not all of it, and that's okay. Capture that energy in that space. And then the golden thread is where your values from before and what you're going to be offering next all come together. This is the thing that you're going to talk about as you pivot that's going to help people see that this is the next logical step in your business. So I'll give you a little bit of time here to just sort of think about how your values play into this space as well.
Why are you crying?
Okay, we're gonna keep moving on, but you can always come back to this exercise whenever it feels right. So let's go to the next slide. This is a concept that if I had more time, I would go into more depth, but I want to introduce it here. And if you're interested, there's a lot of information about this in books. So there's this Japanese concept called Ikigai. I'm probably pronouncing that not quite right. But it's this concept of finding your life's purpose and your life's mission by looking at all of these different areas. And so really all of the three circles you just worked on ideally will fit within this sort of Ikigai at the very center. So what that means is finding where what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs all overlap. So I think it's a really beautiful concept. There's a lot of information on it that can be really helpful, especially if you're in a transition period where you're just sort of trying to get your bearings again, because anytime you know, uprooting something and creating something new, there can be a lot of mess and chaos. And so I find this concept one that is really grounding and can be helpful, like you're floating in the moment. So let's go to the next slide. So behind the scenes, what kinds of things need to happen for this pivot to be successful? So before you even get into presenting that golden thread and launching and all of that, you should be revisiting your ideal client avatar. So looking at it and figuring out what audience aspects are the same and if you need to make any changes there. If they are fundamentally different, you might need to revisit your brand. You might need to revisit your messaging, your voice, your tone, your visuals, all of those things. So that way they are feeling like they're in alignment. If based on all of that, if you have had a shifts and there weren't a whole lot of things in that silver thread, you're really kind of birthing something entirely new. You might need to create new content pillars for your social strategy and also just for your brand in general. You should let your current clients know what's happening first. That's always a great way to build community, and consider offering them a deal or promotion if you are trying to get some new services out there and you just need to get some new clients under your belt with those services, so that way you have testimonials and things like that. Also, if you have a referral program, this is a great time to remind them, because you know who your diehard fans are, right? You know the person who was like, I can't wait to work with you. Let them know. They will be such great advocates for you. And while they don't know how you deliver that service, they know you. They know how you operate. They know how you show up. They know your characteristics. And even though they might not know a whole lot about the new service, they can be some of your greatest allies in terms of navigating a pivot in a way that is a lot more seamless. Next slide. So let's tie it all together with all these threads. What are we doing with these golden and silver threads? So when you are pivoting, you need to start changing the way that you are presenting your brand and your content. So here is where you are now going to shift your focus for now only to the silver threads and the golden threads for your pivot. So these are the things that the services have in common, and also your values. So if you are discontinuing current offers as part of a pivot, this is when you're going to be really switching your marketing and your messaging. So you can focus on value-based content. So any of those silver threads, things that they both have in common, you can keep talking about those aspects, those deliverables, those transformations that you deliver. Keep talking about that. You can share your why again. It's always great to share your why, and especially if there have been changes. I think a lot of times we expect our why to be the same forever, but the reason why you started your business might not be the same thing as why you continue to stay in business. So think about if that why has changed, maybe think about sharing it here. And if it feels good for you, you can also start to tease a pivot here. Hey, this was my why before, and I had these new life experiences, and it started, conjuring all these things for me. Something big is coming that feels aligned, right? Then you can also continue to share lifestyle and behind the scenes content. Now, this is really important to focus on the ways that you're embodying new aspects of your offers. So this looks like living into your values. So making sure that they can see what's going on here. This is the part of you that's your golden thread that's never going to change, or not likely to change. And this will help them make that connection later. So I can use myself as an example. Obviously, I've been doing branding and I'm getting more into goal coaching and supporting people. And joy is at the heart of all of it. So for a while, I was putting out a ton of joy content. And when I started telling people, I'm doing goal coaching, I was like, oh my gosh, this makes total sense. Like, I get it. And it's because I was focusing on those values that makes that transition a lot easier. You can continue to do ask content to see what people are looking for, but I want to say this with a word of caution where it's nice to do market research, because it's not really market research, right? We're just polling people and it's not an official study, but to be like, oh, what do you want to see, this or that? If you get answers that aren't aligned with your new offer, that's okay. You don't have to change what you're going to do. You don't have to put a pause on the pivot, because most people don't know what they need, right? Like, how many times have you worked with a coach or joined a program and then you're like, I think I need this. And then you leave and you're like, wow, I actually did that. And you don't have the vernacular, the things that you need underneath it all. So if you do some surveys and you get some feedback that isn't aligned, don't even sweat it. Also continue to do authority building content. Share a lot of testimonials at this time, so that way people are seeing what it's like to work with you, regardless of what the offer is. It's about your personality and how you deliver on what you say you will deliver. And if you have offers that are going to be remaining, you can keep talking about those as well. You don't have to stop talking about them. All right, next slide. Okay, so announcing your pivot. So like I said before, share your why and explain the trajectory of your why if it's changed during this. People love a backstory. We love them. So just put it out there. Make sure the focus is on the excitement you have for being able to serve people in new ways. I think sometimes pivots, I guess another pivot pitfall, if it's not done tactfully, it can look like a cash grab. right? It can look like, oh, well, they're offering this, like trying to get all this money, and this is like what they're doing. And like, you have to make sure that it's heart focused. So as long as you're focusing on like that goal thread component, that should come through. Make sure that you open up a dialogue for questions. If that's safe for you, if you need to set boundaries around people who are like, hey, why aren't you offering? Set a boundary. You don't have to let them in no matter what. And don't worry about the people who don't understand the pivot anymore. They aren't your people anymore. And that's okay. There are going to be people when you pivot that are going to leave. And that's okay. They aren't your people anymore, and they serve their purpose, and they will find the new people that they need. So then you will find new people that are so excited to work with you, and they've been waiting for you to do this pivot forever. So don't let that get you down. All right, next slide. Next slide. Okay. And then if you're overwhelmed by the brand, remember that you're the seat of this business, and your business can be whatever the fuck you want it to. It can be whatever you want it to be. It can happen at whatever pace you want it to be. Like, these are just things that I feel like are worth repeating. Break down the overall goal of the pivot into smaller tasks. When things are so big and overwhelming, brain dump it all onto a piece of paper. Put everything down. You can do this on a piece of paper in a notebook. You can do it with note cards or Post-it notes. Write down everything, because your head is spinning. You have all of these ideas. And if you're doing it in a notebook, write it all down, then get your highlighters out, create a code. Okay, this is what I'm going to do next month. All the things doing next month are going to be blue. November is going to be green. And go through and do it by month. And then do it by week. And if you really want to get into it, you can block time off on your calendar, but this kind of depends on your ability to uphold to a schedule. So some people need more flexibility. I'm like that. It's like, these are things I got to do at some point this week. If blocking off time on your calendar makes more sense for you, do that. You know what works for you. And then consider what habits will support you along that journey. Because when we are stressed out and we are overwhelmed and we are doing all these things, we revert to whatever habits have served us before. So if you're stressed out and you're like, I know I have to work out in order to like show up as my best self and be able to creatively problem solve all these new things that are coming at me, but then you don't do it because you're stressed out, now you're going to set yourself up for. So build those habits now, so that way as you continue to go through this, you will fall back on good habits that support your growth and your goals. All right, and last slide. Next slide, last slide. So on that last note about habits, oh, sorry, we can go back up. I didn't realize there was another one. I am doing a 21-day habit challenge, so if you want to form some new habits, it's starting on November 1st. It will have a recorded lesson on how to make the most out of your habits while leaving space for growth and grace. You'll get habit tracker templates and worksheets, and a group of people who are also trying to start new habits. Because trying to form new habits alone is sad and boring. It's much more fun when you have other people who are struggling through the same thing. So that is coming up. I'll put a link in the calendar channel. Last slide. We got time for questions.
Yes. This was amazing.
So good.
I'm so excited. Oh my gosh. I would say that for me, one thing that was coming up was like this idea that now that I'm married, I really want to change my Claire B 3D to Claire G 3D. And it's just like a little thing. And I don't even think I would change that many offers, but I keep trying to decide if I want to do it like really publicly or just do it quietly and just like switch it over really quick. But obviously, like you said, something you said was like, everyone loves a backstory. So just like play into it, whatever, and just try to make it something fun. So I'm excited to do that.
Especially in terms of a wedding. Everyone loves love.
Yeah.
True.
Everyone loves love.
I'm excited.
This is so nice. I was doing that. I love that you called it a complicated Venn diagram.
It's so big.
It was. And I'm not going to pronounce that. I think you said it was a Japanese word. Because
Ikigai.
Ikigai. So
Everyone's
No.
close so we can see everyone's face.
Oh yeah.
I just feel better when I'm talking to people's faces.
Yeah.
Same.
Absolutely.
Hi.
Okay. Hello everybody.
Hello again.
Thank you.
But yeah, there was that idea of Ikigai, which is funny because I actually have in like my Chrome tabs is an article all about that. So I need to I need to actually read the article. It's on my like to read list. But as we were doing that like Venn diagram, I was just noticing, because as you probably know, the SSI is pivoting. We are, I think we're finishing up like in the next couple of days, which is so exciting. But I was doing the exercise and I just realized like how it really is a pivot rather than a rebrand, even though we are changing the name and stuff like that, but only because it's just like it was so natural to become what it was. Yeah, it makes the most sense, but it's just interesting because like there's so many things that are similar about it, and it just made me feel a lot better about the pivot. I mean, it's like scary to do new things and to like hope that people like what you're creating. So this was super helpful to realize that it's not like a super crazy transition. It's sort of like a more natural one, which is super nice.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, a lot of times people think it's just like creating this whole new thing. And it's like, no, you get to bring stuff with you.
Yes, and it's a lot better too when you do that, I feel like, because you're like where I'm going to talk about next week about transferable skills. It's like instead of just starting from scratch, you can just take what was working and just make it even better. So
Yeah. It's funny that this got brought up because through the whole time, I mean, my business is going to be 3 in March. But because I have like a love and a background in photography, I've always taken my own brand photos, and I've kind of like I looked over my site and everything and like what's working and what's not working. And I booked in with an actual real brand photographer. I paid my deposit last night. So the 15th of November, my biggest fear. I fucking hate people taking all my own photos. Me, I'm the tripod queen. I take all my own photos. People, the women's retreat I was on last weekend, everyone, like, we all added each other on Instagram, and they were like, oh my God, who takes your photos? I'm like, I take all of them. I take all my own photos. I edit them all myself. I don't like people taking my photo. I'm so fucking awkward. Like,
I love that.
And I finally did it because the one thing on my website that's not working is my freaking photos. Like, they just don't come across because there's only so much you can do with a tripod, and you've got like the remote in your hand, so you've got to like hide it all the time. But yeah, it was like the perfect time. And I wrote like 3 pages of notes. I don't know if anyone else was like, I think because I was just on a women's retreat as well, where we had to like, there was a lot of journaling and a lot of like releasing of things, where I've just been pouring my guts out into like journals and notebooks ever since. So I'm so happy with that exercise, because to me right now, the only thing that makes sense is writing it down.
Yeah.
I get it. I'm extroverted, but if I'm not around, I always say my ideas and my thoughts happen on the outside. But if it's just me, I'm like, my journal gets to be how I get those thoughts out. Because otherwise, like, they just sort of rattle around in your head. They're like loose Legos. And like, until you put them on a page, then you're like, oh, this actually like makes a thing.
Absolutely. I love that.
Can I share one other pivot type of thing that I was thinking about for myself? Remember, like during the pandemic, I was like doing all the kids teaching like Photoshop, and like I've just like completely stopped doing that. But like in a way, I don't know, I feel like it still does feel very aligned now that I'm taking all these notes and stuff. Like I do like teaching that stuff, and I think that I could even pivot it to a place where I was doing like in a mature way to like the producers at the agencies, like who need to know how everything gets made. So I think I'm trying to bring that back a little bit in some sense. That would be cool to be able to even do like a Zoom course once a year type of thing. Like I can totally see the direction that I would take it. It's so exciting. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I love that. You can also do a more complicated version of that Venn diagram where, in case you want more circles, I've tried this one too, where people have so they'll have like 3 offers, right? So you put 3 offers on top of each other, and then you put the Y on top of it. So it helps you see the commonalities of all of your offers as well, but besides just like a new and an old. So you can start to see like, oh, this is what connects like all of these things. Like And it also helps you think of new ones, right? So you're like, oh, all along I've been educating people. Holy shit, I should do more of that. That's what happened for me when I did an activity like that. So it's like you could just draw circles all day and uncover so much about how you've already been doing things inherently.
Yes, that's why it's pivoting and not like starting over again. It doesn't feel as scary. We'll see. So lifetime of changes. So exciting.
Well, thanks, y'all. This was fun.
Thank you.
You're so amazing. You're really good at what you do. I really appreciated this.
Thanks.
Does anyone have any other questions before we skedaddle?
No, thank you.
Beautiful. Well, I was gonna say that we'll have the slides up, but they're already posted in the calendar, so everyone can see them.
In my Google and my Good Notes app on top of the slides.
Yeah.
Genius.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's smart.
It's the best app in the freaking world.
Presenters to post their slides.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'll be working on that.
Beautiful. Well, Kristy, I know you also said that there was going to be a link for the accountability challenge or the accountability month. So you're welcome to go ahead and post that as well in the calendar so that everyone can see it. But thank you.
What are like some examples of like goals that you think people will want to stick with? Like what would be like a normal type of thing?
For like habits.
Oh yeah, the habits, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of, so if it's a business goal, a lot of times how this can come up, because you're like, how the hell do I do a habit for like something that's really like big and amorphous? And it can literally be like, I spend 15 minutes every day, or during the work week, you get to decide, working on this topic. And you can do that, or like, it could even be a personal goal. Hey, I want to drink more water. I want to do this because the way we live our life is the way we run our business. So if you do something in your life that supports you, it will support you in other ways, right? Like if you eat garbage all the time, then you're like, why do I feel like shit? It's like you can do other things to support it as well. So, yeah.
And you can only pick one because you can only change one thing at a time. Isn't that true? I want like I have a whole list of like 10 habits I want to keep with, but no.
Yeah. That's like 2.0, right? Like start with one habit. And that's the thing that happens, like you get excited. Like if you're in a big growth phase, you're like, I'm going to do all of these things. And you're like, I'm going to change how I eat. I'm going to do all this. Like it all started falling. And build on it.
Perfect. All right, that sounds good. I want to do it.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It was so nice to see you guys today.
Yay. Good to see you. I'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye, y'all.
Bye, Darcy. Bye, Darcy.